Hello. Thank you everyone for coming and deciding to spend an hour of your time listening to me talk. Yeah, user testing in production. Do we have the slides up? Yeah, there we go. Fantastic. So yes, I'm Eli. My pronouns they, them, theirs. I'm on Hackaderm if you want to come and find me on the internet. Before we get started, some introduction and disclaimers. Obviously, Nico's already introduced me. But this is me in Sydney doing my best, like, oh my God, there's a landmark thing. I do tech stuff. I'm going to talk about it today. I've been told I need to have this slide. This is an opinionated talk. This is not necessarily going to be the silver bullet for exactly what you need. I'm going to talk about things that I've seen that I think work well and why I think those work well, and talk about things that I've seen that have gone wrong and think about why I think those have gone wrong. So your mileage may vary, but hopefully this talk gives you things to think about and to go away and chew on and to apply or not apply in your own development life. This advice is not limited to if you work on tooling that developers use. That is my experience as somebody who's worked in companies that develop developer tooling. So in particular, the case study that I'm going to be talking about today is a developer tool called Anvil, which is a platform for building web apps using Python. I used to work here about a year ago, and I worked there for 2 years, ending about a year ago. And when I was there, we ran a lot of public betas. And this is a lot of where my experience has come from. As a developer advocate, I've done quite a lot of this, but this advice isn't limited to if your users are developers. You can still run public betas, you can still get a lot of value out of them, but the way you approach it might have to be slightly different. But I'll be using this case study today, which is a developer tooling company. All right, we're going to talk about what a public beta is, when you might want to use one, when it's valuable to use one. We're going to talk about how you document it when you do a public beta, because obviously we're all documenting our code and our products perfectly and beautifully, right? We're going to talk about how to do that well when you're kind of got in-between versions of reality when you're running a public beta. I'm going to talk about collecting feedback, which is obviously a huge part of the point of running a public beta, is to collect feedback, how to use it well, how to avoid common pitfalls when you run a public beta that can completely undercut all of the value that you might get out of it. And finally, talk about how you end your beta phase and go to general availability. How do you decide when a beta feature is actually ready to grow up and be in the real world? So, what is a public beta? Does someone give me a definition of what a public beta is? Okay, don't worry, there's no forced participation here. I just want to give you guys the chance to have this be a bit interactive, because what's the point of in-person if not for interactive? I think it is letting people use a thing while you're still in the process of building it. Like, if you've got a thing that you are building, and it's not done yet, but you want to let people use it anyway, that's what a public beta is for. So when we think about developing software, I like this kind of, there's a model that I'm going to be coming back to throughout this talk, which is the time you spend developing it improves the quality of the thing that you're building. And you are aiming for perfection, right? We all are. But you'll never actually get there. And the more time you spend on a thing, the more the returns diminish. You could spend forever on a thing and it would not actually be perfect. So we can think about points on this life, sort of this timeline, right, of our software. So we've got existing product that is already out there in our company, in our business, whatever we make. So this has had some amount of time put into it, and it's a certain level of quality. What we'd like to do is improve that quality. Either we're improving existing features, or we're releasing a new feature that's going to take that quality of our product to further higher up that quality line. So what we're aiming for with the beta is an improvement in quality. But we also have on this line, wherever you decide your minimum viable product line lands. And this is, like anyone who's done Agile knows this phrase. It's when you have spent the minimum amount of time for something that is of acceptable quality to release. So one way of thinking about a public beta is when you think about proxies for quality. One way of thinking about public beta is that, I'm just going to skip ahead here because, oh, okay, never mind that. Do I have a laser on this? I don't know if I do. Yes, I do. Is when you're here with the MVP, and you want to get to here, and you think that you running a public beta is going to help you get from there to there. And in order to make that judgment about when that's going to be useful, we need to think about quality. Oh my goodness, sorry. Here we go. You've seen these slides like 6 times now. Yeah, we need to think about what quality means and how we measure it. So we use proxies for quality, because it's not something you can touch, it's not something you can hold, it's not something you can actually track. So we use proxies instead, abstractions for anyone who came to Kevlin's talk last lot. So things that we use for proxies for quality might be something like frequency of outages. How often does your product simply not work? How many issues do you have on your GitHub backlog? Are there lots and lots of bugs that people are frequently running into that are hampering their ability to use your product? That's bad quality. Are all of the GitHub issues that are on your backlog minor things that actually are edge cases? That's pretty good. So we can use those as a proxy for quality. And we can use user opinions, because after all, if you build something and nobody uses it, it's not worth anything. So you should have users, and therefore they should have opinions. So this is also a proxy for quality, and it's one of the hardest to measure, but it is at the heart of what we do when we run public betas. We're trying to get user opinions to help us build our product. So when we think about our users, here's a user. If you're going to run a public beta, you have some responsibilities to the users that you're going to ask to participate in that beta and use a thing that's not quite ready yet. It has to be opt-in. You can't force an unfinished product on users. On the flip side, once you get people to opt-in, then they're bought into it. If they said, I want to do this, then when they come across bugs and things that would otherwise annoy them, they go, well, I chose to do this, and now I'm partaking in the act of, like, I'm helping to develop this software by using it and discovering this rough edges. So by letting people opt into it, obviously you prevent the failure mode of like shipping broken software to people who haven't chosen it, but it also actually builds user goodwill. It must be reversible. If somebody has chosen to use a new feature, let's say you've got your production feature and you've released a new version of it and you're doing a public beta with that, if I say, let me use the new thing, try it out, see the funky new features, that shouldn't irrevocably alter anything about my use of the product such that I can't go, that sucks, that's too early stage, I want to go back to the production version. You should be able to move backwards. So this means that, there are various things that this means in terms of when you can and can't use public betas, but I think that's a big one. It has to be worthwhile for your users to participate, because you're essentially asking for free labor for them, unless you're compensating them in some way for taking part in your public beta. You're essentially saying, hey, use something that kind of sucks for a little bit so that we can make it better and make more money, right? So you're actually asking for labor from them, so they have to get something out of it in return. So when you should use one is, this is coming back to sort of the MVP versus aim for beta type thing. If you've got new experimental features, such as if you've got any increased chance of data loss for a person, so if you've got a new public beta feature and you're not quite sure how some of the things are going to like interact with other parts of the existing software, you might want to run this as a beta so you can catch those things early. And this comes back to the increased chance of data loss, comes back to it has to be reversible for a user to go and use your public beta. You need to be very, very careful about these situations, because if I go to the new beta and suddenly it's like, oh, oopsie, we had a bug that we didn't catch and now like all your bank information is gone, that's bad. So these are the things that you need to have like very strong sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like rails, safety guards around, safety rails. And that's one of the things that a public beta can be really useful for, because you can flag that to the user that this is a beta feature. Be very careful about what you do here. We will not let you lose any sensitive data, but things may not behave as you expect. If you've got significant changes to existing core functionality, it's another really good chance to use a public beta. Introducing a new underlying framework. So at Anvil, they recently released into beta, and then they've recently moved it to general availability. An entirely new way of interacting with their online IDE that you use to build apps. So it looks very much the same in some ways, but the entirety of the underlying thing was completely rebuilt. And this may not appear at first glance to users to be different, but obviously a lot of different interactions underneath have changed. So using that as a public beta makes sense, because you don't want to introduce such a big change all at once. You want people to try it out, find the edge cases first. If you're going to disrupt people's user journeys. And user journey is a term that we like to talk about a lot in developer advocacy, but it's essentially like, as a user, when I sign up, what is that journey like? I put in my information, I do this, what's the onboarding like? If I'm a user of an online banking piece of software, what is the user journey of checking my balance, printing out a statement, moving money? If you're disrupting any of those sort of very familiar things that people are doing, core parts of what they do when they use your software, you want to make that an opt-in thing because that's introducing friction and you want people to be aware of that. Yeah. We've got varied use cases. This is something we came up with time and time again at Anvil. It's a platform for building web apps. People were using it for everything from school lunch booking systems that integrated with Discord to Bitcoin dip catchers to like just anything you can think of to do with a web app, people were doing it. And so whenever we introduced anything, it was like, oh, have you seen that? So also at my cloud company that I worked with more recently, we introduced an entirely new observability platform, just an open source kind of thing built on top of Grafana. Obviously, people are going to be using that for all sorts of things, and we wanted to see the breadth of use cases and sort of figure out which ones we wanted to serve and which ones we were happy to let stay kind of a bit rubbish. And if you're introducing a new way to interoperate third-party tools, if you're introducing a new integration with something that you don't control, and you might get completely unexpected data into your system because of that, that's another one that you might want to sort of gate behind a public beta and see all the weird things that people are trying to do with it. So, if you're not ready to deprecate existing versions is another one. We see this all the time with APIs. You know, you've got version 2, and you say, okay, end of life for version 1 is going to be in like a year. Give people time to refactor their code. If you have users, again, this is about like the user journey thing. If your users are very set in their ways, they have high inertia, and you're going to need to like give them a kick to like make them move over to the new thing. You might want to give them a long runtime to get used to the new thing, try it out at their own pace, and that way they won't be so disgruntled when they have to move to the new thing. We saw that with Anvil as well. They released an entirely new IDE, in fact, which is, I think it is out of beta now, but it was in beta for about a year because people were very, very keen on the old one. And it was great, it worked, it got the job done. The new one was better, but people didn't want to move because it meant like a learning curve. So for whatever reason, you're not ready to deprecate existing versions, usually because a lot of people depend on it. This is a really common reason for doing public betas. So this is an example of high user inertia. Has anyone seen this comic before? Yeah, this is an XKCD comic describing, so there's been a change to some software. CPU no longer overheats when you hold down the spacebar. And someone's complaining because it broke their workflow. My control key is hard to reach. I hold spacebar instead, and I configured Emacs to interpret a rapid temperature rise as control. And says, oh, that's horrifying. Look, it's like, my setup works for me. Just add an option to re-enable the spacebar heating. Like, this is an unambiguously good change, but it still broke someone's workflow. And this person is going to need time to adjust to the new world where the spacebar no longer heats up their computer. Obviously, this is an extreme example, but it's the kind of thing you do run up against, especially in developer tooling. Like, this is something that is very particular to developer tooling because we're set in our ways and we like the things we like and we've got everything set up just the way we want it. And then someone comes along and says, hey, we're changing everything from out underneath you. You need time to come to terms with that psychologically. Right. So, coming back to this graph, essentially it's what I said earlier. If you're at the MVP stage with a product, and some of those factors that we just talked about are present, like you're not ready to deprecate an existing version, or there's lots of different ways people might be using the thing and you want to see some of them before you're ready to call this production ready. If doing that is going to help take you from MVP to where you want to be, that is when you want to run a public beta. When should you start one if you decided that this is what you want to do? Like, some people would argue that it's as soon as you hit that MVP stage, as soon as you've got something that gets a job done. I don't think that's always the case. I think you should do it as soon as you can solve new problems with whatever that MVP is. If you've got an existing feature and you've built something that is eventually going to be better, but at the moment only does everything the current one does, but with like, it kind of sucks because it's not finished yet, users aren't going to want to do that because they can already do everything that they could do with that new one in the old one with a polished workflow, like user journeys that they're used to. So you have to be, as a user, you're not going to want to use that new thing unless it lets you solve new problems. You also don't want to annoy your users. And obviously one way of annoying your users is by releasing something that's unusably buggy or has no value to them, doesn't let them solve new problems. But you can also annoy your users by releasing something that is polished but wrong. Like something that's a beautiful piece of software It doesn't solve any of the problems that they actually have. It solves new problems, but not ones that they actually have. So we saw this sometimes with Anvil, where generally they're very, very good about like developing the features that their users actually want. There's always a handful of people who say, yeah, sure, this new thing you've built is great, but what I really wanted was something else entirely. So that's sometimes feedback you get. And if you manage to release something that's polished but wrong for like a large swathe of your users, you're going to annoy them. And public betas run on user trust and user goodwill. This is like a precious resource that we've got to manage very carefully. So, how can you document a public beta? Who here writes documentation as part of their job? A handful. Who here has never written documentation? Okay, so everyone has written some documentation. It's hard, right? It's hard. And that's even when you're not in between states of reality, because when you have a public beta, it exists, but it's not the thing you necessarily are always pointing people to. And you still have to document what the world is like without that feature in it for people who are not opted in. So you've got, essentially it depends how you document this, depending on a couple of factors. This is a kind of classic. If you don't hear this multiple times over the next 3 days, I'll be very surprised. So if you're developing a new feature, something that's completely additional to the existing product, this is simple in the sense that you put it under a new section and you say, this is a beta feature, here are the caveats, like here are, you opt into this at your own risk, etc., etc. Simple is not easy, to be clear. This is still a hard job. Documentation is still a difficult thing to do and to do well. But in terms of organizing your documentation and making it clear what it refers to, this is the straightforward case. If you are introducing something that is meant to replace or upgrade an existing feature, this gets complicated because you're going to need to maintain 2 sets of documentation, essentially, one for the existing version and one for the new version. So when you write docs, they have a few responsibilities. They have to be correct, obviously. This is kind of table stakes for documentation. They have to be clear. If your docs are correct, but sort of unreadable, I mean, technically you can document your code by simply open sourcing it. If anyone wants to know what your code does, go read it. That's not helpful, it's not clear, it's not communicating anything of value, so you have to be clear in your documentation. And, ideally, documentation should also be complete. If I need to know something about your software, it should be in the documentation. However, when you have 2 different versions of reality, these 2 things start to compete with each other. They start to become in tension. How can I be clear when there are 2 things that I could mean by anything that I'm documenting? So, how do we solve this? How do we find ways around, like, navigate that tension? So this is the first option that I've seen. And you simply go, okay, wherever there's a feature that has 2 versions, you put 2 versions of docs right next to each other. And you say, this is the existing documentation, this is for the beta users, you link to information about the public beta, and you say, okay, this is how things are. And this is quite nice because it lets people directly compare. And sometimes this can be an argument in favor of like your new product because they go, oh, the user experience looks much nicer in this section and in this section. And maybe they'll opt in to the public beta. So it's also a nice little way of advertising and getting users to actually participate. This is pretty low overhead when it comes to maintaining documentation. You just add sections in as if it were a new feature. But what it does do is it introduces noise into your documentation. Somebody who does not care about the public beta has to scroll past that and see stuff they don't care about. And we have short attention spans. That reduces the amount of attention that people are going to be paying to your docs. It's going to introduce friction. It's going to make them more annoyed while reading their documentation. All of these things drive user satisfaction down. Vice versa, if you've got people who are using the new beta, they don't care about what it looked like in the old world. They want this, they want that. And so we can actually do that too. This works well if you are only going to have your product in beta for a short while, because you can tolerate that introduction of noise and friction because the low overhead is worthwhile to you. However, if you're going to have something that runs for a long time and you really care about reducing that friction for your users over a long time, what you can do is this, and we did this at Anvil and it was really, really cool. So you simply have a toggle that sets in your user's cookies or something, and you say, okay, which one do I want? This is, it has some engineering overhead in terms of how do you present your docs. You have to add that toggle, you have to do some work to like store in the cookies, display the right thing. Hugo, I know, has functionality that lets you do this because that's what we used. And it's a really nice user experience because you go, okay, you're now viewing the beta docs. If you would like to view the other old ones, here's how you go. And you just have a banner at the top of the page or a toggle at the bottom or something. And it's really nice. And I think this is a really good option. It's clear about what you're looking at, because if you add a banner in that says, this is for the beta, and you make that clear also in the text of your documentation, it is clear, it is complete, and ideally it's also correct. So this is a nice way of fulfilling all three of those responsibilities that your documentation has, even when you're trying to document two things at once. Yeah, and we did this for the long-running beta that I mentioned that we had for over a year, and that worked really, really well. And especially if it actually redirects you to different permanent links, then people can link to the beta version of this or the original version of this. And that's really nice if you have like user forums and people are posting documentation as part of that like conversation. I'll come back to user forums in a little bit. So that is documentation. It's tricky, but it can be done. And yeah, I like this. I like this as a solution. So, oh yeah, here we go. Here's from the Anvil. You're currently viewing the new Anvil editor docs. Yeah, this is the public beta that they recently went to general availability with, and it was only like a couple of months in beta, I think. Yeah, there we go. How can you collect user feedback? Once you've decided you're starting a public beta, you know when to do it, you're documenting it correctly. The real value of running a public beta is getting that user feedback as a proxy for quality and getting real life use cases to judge all of your other metrics for quality against. So, you've got to make it easy for people to tell you things. If you want somebody to do something, you have to make it easy for them to do that. Phelps' first law of business is if you want people to pay you, you have to make it very easy for them to pay you. And this is the same principle. You need to have at least one place where they know their feedback will be heard that is specifically for giving feedback about the feature that they're currently testing. So have an email address, have a forum, have a feedback form somewhere. And I'm going to go through a few options that you have for collecting feedback. You've got to allow unstructured feedback. Let people tell you things in their own words. So whatever your canonical place is, it should have an option for just free text, essentially. Otherwise, you end up in this situation. And the feedback that you get from, obviously this is, again, like the XKCD, it's an extreme example, but it shows the failure mode, right? And you can see in a much more realistic sense, you might completely miss out a class of frustration that people are having with your product by simply not envisioning that might be a thing. And if you don't have text at the bottom, you'll never know. Interleaving product points with feedback is a great way to make people like actually give you feedback as it occurs to them. Like I have ADHD. I'll go, oh, I should send that. Oh, I should write that down and send that later. And I don't. And lots of developers are the same way. So immediacy of access to that feedback point is a really good thing to do if you want your actual people to actually give you feedback as they think of it. However, this can also add friction if you constantly have a pop-up saying, hey, how was that? You also will get annoyed with it and never do it. So this is one to handle with caution because there's a balance there. But it can be good to think about ways you can do this unobtrusively. So interviews are one way that I really love when you user interviews. Sit down with your users, identify who your power users are, sit down with them and go, okay, this new feature, what did you like? What did you not like? What problems do you want to solve with it? What problems do you have that it doesn't solve yet? If you were going to recommend this over the existing version, would you? Why? What language would you use? Things like this. Obviously, unstructured, open-ended. They let you hear things from your users that you would never otherwise hear. It lets you understand your user base. I recommend doing this regularly with users, whether or not you're running public betas. I think it's a fascinating thing to do. But these are great for public betas. This is the kind of thing where you would maybe financially reward people for doing it, like, oh, you get $50 of credits on our platform for doing this and spending 45 minutes of your time. I love these. I think these are such rich sources of information about your product and how people use it and what they think about it. But obviously they are very intensive in time. They do not scale well. So other options that you have are things like feedback forms. So just one place where any number of people asynchronously can just like pop in information to you. It's going to be much less interactive. It's going to be much less you can't necessarily get back in touch with that person to go, oh, what did you mean when you said this? But it scales really well. User forums are fantastic. I think if you build developer tooling, I think if you build almost anything, you should have a forum. Forums are great. Discord sucks. If you want to have user discussions, it should be somewhere you can permanently link to. I love Discourse for this. Anvil has a thriving Discourse forum, which I will be showing screenshots of later, and it is an invaluable source of user feedback. You set up a new section or a new tag for things relating to your public beta. People can post there. They can get information from you, like, oh, thanks for pointing out that issue. It's now on our internal tracker. But they can also interact with other members of the community. Those interactions are gold dust when it comes to understanding your users and how they relate to your product. So user forums, you should have them. But at the very last resort, if you're running a public beta, have a dedicated email address where people can send you just emails about it. So all of these are great ways, methods, channels of getting feedback from your users. But when you get it, it's going to be a jumbled mess. It's not going to be sort of like, this person gave us good feedback, this person gave us negative feedback. It's going to be sort of a mess of just sort of very human feedback, right? Not sort of automated, unless you are just using feedback forms, but then you run into that limitation that you haven't necessarily accounted for all the things you might get told. So, you have all your feedback, what should you do with it? I think you should sort it into categories. And I have 5 categories here that I'm going to talk about. Obviously, this is one of those points where your mileage may vary. These are the categories I like and I think are useful depending on your use cases and what your user base is like. There may be other categories that you use, but the general principle sort of stands. So, this doesn't work at all. This doesn't work how it should. This doesn't work how I think it should. Can I have something else as well? I wanted something else instead. Right. And some of these might look quite similar. I'm going to go through each of them and sort of talk more about what each one means. So, this doesn't work at all. It happens more often than you think. You will release something that simply is broken. It returns Java lang null pointer exception or, whatever. So this is Beta Designer. This is the recent beta that Anvil did. Went through their forum. Again, Discourse forum. It's great. You tag it with things, and you say, okay, there are things that are wrong. Like, oh, this is something that, no user should be seeing, and this just happened. But what you can also do is you can say that it's been fixed. So, don't get defensive about it. Obviously, it's really easy if you have built something and someone goes, yeah, it doesn't work. You want to find a way that it's their fault, but that's not useful. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help your users. This translates directly into engineering work, essentially. This doesn't work how it should. This is an example of that. Weird behavior in the beta editor. So this is the long-running beta that they had. And this is just like someone's going, I don't know what's going on here. This is weird. And it's not necessarily blocking their workflow, but it's something that's confusing them. It's adding friction to their developer experience. It doesn't work how it should. This should not happen. But it's not a breaking. It doesn't break things. It's just weird. This means the user experience is bad. This could technically be a thing that is MVP quality. Just because it's MVP quality doesn't mean that it's actually good, and that's what you're trying to improve from. This translates directly into work as well. People should, in today's keynote, I was talking about how nice it is in a language when you think that it should work and you try it and it just does work. This is what we're aiming for, and this type of feedback is saying that's not true yet, and you want it to be true. So it translates directly into work. This doesn't work how I think it should. And this is where opinions differ on what good user experience is, essentially. So here's Stefano, one of the power users of Anvil, lovely guy. He participates in all the public betas, so on and so forth. And he said, look, okay, this is how I want it to be. And this is opinionated. This is something where other people might legitimately disagree and have a point. It's not just thing is showing up and it shouldn't. It's here's how I want my user experience to be. And depending on your user base, maybe most of them share this opinion, in which case it falls more, then it moves into the former category where what your user base has decided it should be like is this. But this is one of the things that forums are great for, because this is a post in a forum. other people chimed in and said, oh, yeah, or it could be like this, or actually that would be really annoying for me because. So this is one of the things that I will always rep forums for this. So it means the user experience might be bad in general. It's certainly bad, at least for the person who made that piece of feedback. This is where unstructured feedback is so useful, because these are the kind of things that you don't hear about unless you let people tell you in their own words. Discuss it with your users. Say, okay, if we were to do this, it would mean X, Y, and Z. Do other people, what do other people think? This is the kind of thing where having open conversations with your users in a forum is really, really useful. It might translate into work. It might not. It's kind of your call. And this is one of the really, really interesting things about public betas, is you get to learn more about how people are using what you make. I wanted something else instead. You made it easier for me to open a business account with your bank, but what I really, really wanted was a new mortgage calculator or something. I don't know. I don't work in banking. So this is actually a really common thing that you get. Or why doesn't the thing that you just did include the thing I specifically want? If you track feature demand for your product, this counts towards that feature demand. And you can acknowledge that and say, thank you for expressing, thank you for letting us know that that's something that would be valuable to you. Maybe you justify it by saying, oh, this didn't make sense as this part of work, or, that's actually on our roadmap for in the next 6 months or something. You don't have to justify it. Yeah. This is not very useful feedback when it comes to your public beta. However, people will give you this piece of feedback regardless, so it's got its own bucket. Can I have that other thing as well? If they haven't said anything else about your public beta, this is, yeah, it looks good to me, can I have something else? What you'll find is that if you do a thing well, people want more of it. And this is what that piece of feedback means. It said, okay, yay, you made a new thing. What about the next thing though? So it counts towards demand for that feature, and you acknowledge it and you just say, hey, thank you for saying that you want this thing and that we've added it to, we've taken that into consideration. So those are your kinds of feedback. But the last bit of all of these slides I've gone through were about communicating back. Acknowledge and maybe justify, acknowledge this bit. You've got to communicate back to your users at every stage of this process. You communicate with them. If you fix something, remember that forum page screenshot that I showed, and it had that fixed tag for some of those bug reports? Communicate when you fix something. Oh, yeah, there it is, for done, yeah. This isn't just for public betas, this is also for feature requests and other stuff. But this is a great thing to do because it sort of lets people know, hey, that thing you wanted, there's been an update to your post, they've done it. And it makes your users feel heard, it makes them feel valuable part of the process. Not just makes them feel that, they are, but it makes them know that too. When you fix something, communicate if you change something. So if you said, okay, maybe it wasn't a fix, but you updated the UX because somebody said this doesn't work how I think it should. Communicate that too. Communicate if you decide not to change or fix something as well. No, I don't have an example of that. But this is the kind of thing where that post from Stefano where he's like, oh, here's how I think the new thing should be. If you decide that that's not how you're going to go, don't just ghost that conversation, actually communicate back, close the loop. We decided to do this, maybe it will be for these reasons, maybe you justify it, maybe you say this would actually be too much engineering work, maybe this actually is a much bigger refactor, or debt is getting in the way or something, which is something you can say to developers, maybe less so if not developers. Yeah, communicate back. It seems counterintuitive, communicate just to say no. But the thing is that it's all part of maintaining that dialogue with your users and making them feel heard and part of the process. So, when everything's working, you're aiming at a situation that looks like this. You update the product, you get feedback on that product, and then you use that feedback to make decisions, and then you communicate about those decisions. And then this cycle goes round and round and round, and you're in a sort of stable equilibrium, right? And this is what you're aiming for as the public beta proceeds, is that this process iterates until you're done. So, how can that go wrong? And those are the three categories of problems I'm going to talk about, is in these three things. So, things that can go wrong with updating a product. You ship something broken, you ignore your users. You let bugs go unfixed after having shipped something broken, you ignore your users. Or you don't communicate back to people about having fixed their bugs. Or you ship something that is not broken, but it breaks people's workflow. You ship breaking changes. Don't do these things. This is just engineering stuff. I don't need to talk about this. We all know what this means. Don't ship bad stuff. The more interesting bits are when users give feedback. How can this go wrong? Well, we've talked about how to handle feedback when you get it, but what if you don't get it? What if it's just crickets and you don't even know if people are using your thing? If they don't know how, if you didn't communicate about the ways that they can get in touch with you with their feedback, this is the value of having a canonical place where they know they can go to be heard. If they can't express their views properly, you come back to this form, right? If they can't express what they think, then they won't be able to give you the feedback that they want, and they won't give you any. If they don't think they'll be heard, so even if you've done everything up to this point right, there's still a chance that your users don't trust that you care about their opinion. And this is a really hard problem to fix because public betas run on user trust. Public betas can also be used to build user trust. But if people don't think they'll be heard, you won't get feedback from them because why would you bother giving feedback if you don't think that anyone's going to take it into account? That's a really hard problem to fix. That's not something I can cover in this talk, unfortunately, but that is another reason why you might not be getting feedback. Last category of things that can go wrong is making and communicating decisions based on feedback. If you fail to communicate about what you're doing, users fear sneaky updates, and the reason I have used that word is because of this thread, right? And this is from, I took this screenshot, so it started in August 21. I think I took this screenshot in October, and it had 148 posts in it, and it's only got more since then. And it's a really nice thread because it shows that users care and notice about ways the product is being updated. Anvil has a very agile release cycle. It doesn't do sort of versioning. It just things keep improving, things keep breaking, things keep improving. But it also is kind of an indictment of their communication about the things that are being updated. And in response to this, Anvil did actually implement a changelog, and they put things like that in their newsletter now. So they're doing a better job based on this kind of meta feedback, which was that they weren't communicating enough. So if you don't, if you don't communicate about things, users don't know what to expect. They're going to fear sneaky updates. You lose a chance for feedback if you don't communicate about changes that you're making and fixes that you're doing. And users lose trust. And as we just talked about, public betas run on user trust. It's an incredibly precious resource that you have to manage. And communication is really the key to making sure that you can grow that trust. So, if you have managed all of those problems, if you have managed to avoid all of them, you will end up in this cycle. And you'll keep improving things, you'll keep collecting feedback, that your users will trust you more and more, everything is great, and at a certain point, you are going to want to move out of the public beta phase. How do you know when to do that? Well, when everything is perfect and everyone in the world is happy and you've got world peace and solved hunger, etc. That's never going to happen. We come back to this graph. Perfection, you don't reach it, ever. You can come asymptotically close, but you remember that where you wanted to be at the end of your beta. So you want to know, did you get there? And we come back to those proxies for quality, and we look at those and we evaluate them to say, okay, are we there yet? Think about frequency of outages or sort of issues that come up. If you're using a public beta, you can see real, in the wild versions, not simulated, of things that can go wrong, outages and bugs and things of this nature. So you have a pretty good idea of how this thing is going to perform in real production, in general availability. GitHub is your backlog. This has been populated by your user feedback and user opinions, the entire point of running a public beta. You should have access to all of the things that you use as proxies for quality. And again, these are just 3 examples. Your own metrics are going to apply. So you can use those to evaluate. Are you there yet? You can also things like parity with existing product. So back at the beginning of this, I mentioned the case where you have an existing product and you have your new beta. And the beta does everything the old one does, but it kind of sucks. That is minimum viable product because your new thing does have to do everything your old thing does. If you take away users' ability to solve problems with the new thing, you've taken a step backwards. People are going to hate it. You need feature parity, so you need at least that. You might want to come out of beta so you can unblock future development. You might want to deprecate the old thing, building on top of the new thing. However, handle with caution because I have worked with founders who just wanted to rush ahead and build the next cool like, greenfield product. To their credit, I think the founders at Anvil had that as a tendency but managed it very well. But there's definitely a failure mode here where you just rush through something, say, this is actually done now, when it's not really because you want to build the next shiny new thing. So caveat with that one. Don't forget, you've got to communicate with your users when you end your public beta. You've got to tell them, this is coming out of beta in this date, hopefully a couple of months in the future. The old one will be deprecated sometime after that. You've got to communicate, otherwise people will be like, what, this one's going away? I had no way of knowing. And on that note, you've got to make sure that the communication channels you use to get in touch with your users are ones they actually check. The user forums are all well and good for Anvil, but they really need to be emailing people about it as well, which they do. Right. So, what have we learned as we come up on the 40-minute mark here? Well, we've talked about when and why to use public beta. If you've got something that's good, but you need actual users to put their hands on it in order to know where to go next. We've talked about how you start it, as soon as people solve new problems. We've talked about documentation and my personal favorite of having like the toggle to switch between the two different worlds. I think that is clear, complete, and correct, and I like it very much. We've talked about user feedback. How do you collect it? How do you sort it into categories, and what do you do in response? We have talked about wrapping it up, how to decide when to go to general availability and what you need to do in those cases. And most of all, we have talked about treating your users with respect. No business is worthwhile unless it has people for whom it solves problems. Those are your users, and you need them more than they need you. All right, because this is also a public beta, continually improving this talk, that QR code takes you to a little feedback form built in Anvil, where you can leave me unstructured, free text feedback about this talk, and it's completely anonymous. So that wraps me up. There is 20 minutes, give or take, for questions, or we can all go to coffee early and lunch. Question?
Yeah. You have these proxy metrics.
Can you take the microphone so the
the recording, yes.
the offline.
So hi, you mentioned the proxy metrics for measuring the quality. Because pure quality is hard to measure, but since we optimize the metrics we're measured by, over time those become stale, right? How do you deal with this continuous loop of getting to a stale metric?
Yeah, so the question has been picked up for the video, I don't need to repeat it. Yeah, the eternal problem of as soon as you introduce a metric, it becomes a goal, and you optimize for that rather than the thing it's actually meant to measure. Continuous evaluation, I would say, depending on your product sort of cycle, it might make sense every 3 months to stop and go, okay, are our North Star metrics the ones that make sense? So at Anvil, one of the North Star metrics we had for the developer relations team was number of sign-ups, user sign-ups over a given period, including free users. And we sort of had lots of discussions about whether or not that was the thing we actually wanted to do in order to measure the success of our team. But yeah, it is a problem. It's a problem not just with public betas, but just software development, anything in general. As soon as you put metrics on a thing, you start trying to gain the metrics, especially if your salary, bonus is on the line, or even your job. Continuous evaluation, I think you need to have a team that is willing to have that conversation and a company that is willing to say, okay, maybe we need to change our metrics, depending on how big and full of inertia your organization is. They might have built lots of complicated systems on top of those metrics, be very resistant to that change. Yeah, just evaluating whether or not they are the right metrics. Another thing about metrics is you have to be able to measure them. That's what the word means, like sort of measurable thing. Not all of the things that I talked about, so user feedback, for example, can be given like a number that you can average or something. It's more vibes. So talking about how you quantify those vibes is also should be an ongoing conversation, I think. Yeah, like good question, there's not really a good answer.